I just wanted to apologize to the members for the delay, and they got caught up in security, and I know our speakers are all ready to go, and as soon as they're ready, we're going to get started.
Okay, it's my privilege to welcome everyone to this session of the Institute of Medicine Forum on Investing in Children globally. We're here in Addis to focus in on two things. One is on acute disruptions and their impact on the development of children, and the other is looking at family and community investments in optimizing the development of children. I think it's very appropriate that we're in Ethiopia for both of these topics. On the first one, because of the recent Ebola epidemic. In the second case, I think Ethiopia is particularly well equipped to discuss family and community investments for a couple of reasons. One is we'll be hearing about the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences, and Ethiopia has done an amazing job of pulling together science and putting that science into action. And the other is the incredible primary health care platform that Ethiopia has built, the health extension platform, doing a fantastic job in achieving Millennium Development Goal 4, for example, one of only 19 countries that's achieving that. I think our big challenge over the next few days is to think about how can we influence that primary care platform to really take on the interventions that will work to optimize child development as well, alongside child survival. So with that, we want to get right into our main event. I think we have maybe 3 people who are new here with us tonight that I just wanted to very briefly introduce. In the back, we have Bete Temeke and Ms. Lolly. Lolly Temeke is here. And Emilia Narsat, my daughter, is here with us. So we want a special welcome to these 3. Bete and Lolly were very instrumental in helping to put together the site visits that we had yesterday, and also helping out with some of the videos. So Amina Abu Baker is my co-chair for this meeting. I want to introduce Amina. You'll be hearing from us throughout the next couple of days, and she will introduce our program and get it going.
Thank you for the introduction. I'll make it very brief. So the sessions today, the keynotes, will be chaired by Professor Kofi Mafo, who is a professor and the founding director of the Institute of Human Development at Aga Khan University. I know we are all anxious to listen to the fabulous keynotes, so I won't take any more time. Welcome, Kofi.
Thank you very much, Amina, and thank you all. And I want to welcome, even before I introduce them, welcome our speakers to the 5th in a series of 9 workshops that are taking place around the world. And because our guests have profiles already published, I'm just going to introduce them very, very briefly. We're going to have these 2 presentations. Each will run for just about 18 to 20 minutes, and we will have about 8 to 10 minutes of conversation after each of them. And I'm hoping that we'll stay within time. That's a lot of pressure on my colleagues here. The first speaker is going to be Dr. Nasosha Petene, who is the Executive Director of the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences. And I'm not going to say how long she's been at the AAU. She and I decided that we'll keep the date secret. And he's going to be talking to us about the making of an academy. And right after that, my colleague here, Dr. Teresa Betancourt, will also speak. Teresa has been doing about 13 years of research on the continent, and she will be talking on the topic of studies of adversity, resilience, child mental health and development, with case studies in Sierra Leone and Rwanda. So without much further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Resha, and I'll be monitoring your time very closely. Okay. Yes, we can put it.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I would like to welcome you all to Addis Ababa. The Ethiopian Academy of Sciences is very excited for facilitating hosting this big workshop. We look forward to the 2 days, 3 days that are coming. And I thought maybe it may be pertinent to introduce the academy, what we did to create the academy in the last 5 years. Ethiopia did not have an academy for very long, but we are trying to catch up on the lost time. Now, academies all over the world support and enhance the advancement of science and scholarship from the Royal Society and also your own National Academy of Sciences to the youngest, the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences. We are the youngest academy in the world, but not anymore. We used to say this, but a few months ago, there is now about 6 weeks ago, there is a new academy in Burkina Faso. So we are not anymore the youngest, but we're close. Now, I just want to tell you the story of the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences. The idea of establishing a science academy in Ethiopia was suggested by Dr. Akil Lamma. Maybe some of you may know the name Akil Lamma. This is a guy who observed that the snails die in where people wash their clothes using a traditional soap, which is called indot. This is an extract from a plant we call Phytolacca dodecandra, and he observed that when women were washing their clothes, snails nearby died and were accumulated. So from that, he developed what's called the Lamma toxin, which played a significant role in the control of bilharzia. This guy, he came up with a suggestion in the 70s for establishing an Ethiopian Academy of Sciences. At that time, still the emperor was alive, and this was presented to the emperor and his government. And they said, Ethiopia does not have many scientists, and why do you try to have this academy when you don't have the scientists? And Dr. Akilu said that let's first have the beehive, which is the academy, and as you know, when you hang a beehive, the bees come in flocking. So that was the metaphor he used. But during the time of the emperor, the academy was not going to be. It took 40 years, and there was no effort to establish an Academy of Sciences. We were not, as scientists, we found out that we were not being invited to meetings to major academies, and this was a concern for many of the scientists, my colleagues. And this is Akil Lamma, by the way. And around 2006, 2007, we started an email discussion group about establishing an Ethiopian Academy of Sciences. This was a big email group, and we included also everybody, also people in the diaspora. And there were many suggestions coming about how we should establish the academy, what kind of an academy it is. And there were debates as to the merit of creating several academies at the same time and creating a federation of academies. There were even wild ideas. But finally we brought together presidents of professional associations and created an ad hoc committee. This ad hoc committee worked for almost 8 to 9 months about the merits of creating an academy in Ethiopia. What kind of academy should it be? Should it be an academy of science alone, or should it be an academy that brings together the social sciences, humanities, and letters? These were discussed by this other committee, which called for a national conference. And here, what you see here are the members of that ad hoc committee. We have here a geologist, a political scientist, an agriculturalist, an engineer, and also an ecologist and a neurosurgeon in this group. We brought all this together to discuss the creation of an all-encompassing science academy. The other committee ended up producing a document and called a national conference in which most of the scholars of this country gathered and discussed whether this nation needs an academy or not. This was answered positively, and the gathering decided that it should be an academy of all the sciences together. And they said and emphasized that we should have an academy that is independent, that is autonomous, that may seek assistance from the government, but that should assert itself as an autonomous and independent academy. So we formed a launching board in this national conference. The launching board slowly worked on the statutes of the academy. So it took about a year. The launching board worked slowly on the many articles of the statutes, and after having a draft, then the launching board, which you can see here, led by Professor Reda, a neurosurgeon, and a historian, Bahar Zode, maybe you may know, a former president of Addis Ababa University, Professor Alamayo. These guys that were very respected by the Ethiopian intellectual community, they come up with the criteria that we use to select the fellows of the academy. Of course, criteria that is used for selecting fellows in all academies are similar, but we had one or two things in common. We said, apart from publications and apart from productivity in the sciences, we said that people who have made significant difference in institution building should be part of this academy. Not only people who have contributed in institutional building, this must be also people who have done something outside their area of specialization in development in education. So the criteria were set up by this launching board, and the first members, fellows of 49 members, were selected by the group. And what you see here is the first founding members of 49. We were founded on March 27, 2010, and we were officially launched on April 10, 2010 at the Africa Hall in the presence of the president of the nation there. And during this time, as you know, most of us are senior, and some of the ministers of this country were one time our own students. So through these ministers, we had an audience by with the late Malla Zenawi. The late Malla Zenawi understood the objectives that we have, and he could see that we could play a significant role in promoting science and technology in this country, and he was excited by the idea of establishing a science academy. He just asked us what the Ethiopian government should do to us, and we said three things. First, that we should have an act of parliament that recognizes us as an academy. We brought the example of the National Science Academy of the United States, which I understand was initiated by none other than Abraham Lincoln, and we brought also many examples. And he said that he would see to it that our academy would get an act of parliament. As you know, most African science academies have been around for more than 30, 40 years, some for the last 20 years, 10 years, and only two other academies had an act of parliament. So we were very fast in getting an act of parliament while still maintaining our independence and autonomous stature. The act of parliament gave us legitimacy to work on science and technology in this country. And through the proclamation, we were re-established, and that gave us a chance to work with many ministers and also to address central issues of this nation. Not only an act of parliament, we also obtained submission from the government. Not such a big amount, but an amount that is enough to to give us a standing. I would like to say that sister academies were very instrumental in this step. We could obtain our credibility because we were supported by two important academies. The first one was the Royal Society. The Royal Society was here when we started the National Academy, but then through the ASADI program, which is led by Peter Kelly, as you know, through the ASADI program, we got a grant. This is a grant to help African Science Academies. It's called African Science Academies Development Initiative. And we were the first, we were the last to get this support, but that support helped us undertake important studies that created some credibility in the eyes of some government officials. So this was a tremendous help for us. Now, these are some pictures when our fellows in the presence of the Science and Technology Ministry were signing the book of membership. This was a kind of a celebratory mood for us. And this is when the Academy was launched. Now, we have three categories. I will not bother you by these details because you already know, as most of you are fellows for your own academies. But the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences has about 137 fellows now and about 35 associate fellows. These are fellows. The associate fellows are fellows, these may be Ethiopian or non-Ethiopian, but these are people who have done a significant contribution to the advancement of science in this country. And many Americans, Europeans are members of this group, and we have one honorary member. Now, the vision is to create a scientifically literate society in Ethiopia, and our mission is to foster a scientific culture. And the scope, as I said, includes all the sciences. Now, so our core functions are recognizing excellence in science, that is what every academy does, and also selecting scholars to be members of the academy, and also to reward excellence in the country, and also to serve as think tank function. This is our role, to serve as an advisory role, and also to run science and technology and innovation programs. You may wonder about our logo. This is our logo here. It has three components. First, what you see is a series of concentric circles that grow and spread. That is to represent that the academy works hard for the spread of good ideas, for the spread of science. That is the central function of the academy. But then you also see these rectangular blocks ever growing, and that represents that the academy stands for nation building, to build this nation and to assist in the development effort of the nation. And so the green, as you know, is because we are for sustainable development and for environmental sustainability. That is the meaning of our logo. Now, we have a strategic plan that comes to an end at the end of 2015, which has about 5 pillars. The first is to increase and strengthen our visibility and relevance in the nation, and also to provide consensus-building platforms on critical national issues. I'm going to give examples of such critical issues. And the third pillar of our academy is promoting science, technology, and innovation, and recognizing excellence and building institutional capacity and sustainability of the academy. Now, I will not go through the list, but an important thing I would like to say is that the academy got a custodianship of very historical building that used to belong to the former foreign minister of Ethiopia 100 years ago. So that's one thing that we got. We are now an institution that is recognized by most government sectors, and we undertake studies for different government sectors. Now, one study that we just completed was commissioned to us by the Ethiopian Science and Technology Ministry, and this is to study the supply and demand of the science and technology human resources power of this country, and to predict what the nation would need for in the next 10 years. This is a very daunting task. We had to bring in lots of econometrics, lots of statisticians, and we submitted that study 3 weeks ago. It was debated, and that we believe increased our visibility and credibility in the eyes of some of the government ministries. So we undertook several studies. I will not go into those, but an important milestone in our activity was in having the first science congress of this nation. For this, we studied the state of the sciences of all the different fields in the agricultural sciences, in the health sciences, in engineering, and we presented the summaries of these progresses and discussed how science and technology research in this country should advance in the future. The next important thing was the 9th annual meeting of the African Science Academies, the ASADI program. We were fortunate enough to be trusted to run the 9th annual meeting of African Science Academies by the coordinating group led by Dr. Peter Kelly. And that Congress had the theme of biotechnology for Africa's development. We wanted to bring in to the attention of important government bodies, both within the country and outside, that biotechnology, Africa should open its doors to the science of biotechnology. As you may know, most African countries simply do not believe that something good can come from biotechnology. This is a media hype that you hear, and we try to influence the policy. And as a result of our effort, this nation now has a new biosafety law that allows work on GMOs in this country. And I just wanted to show you as an example that science academies can influence governments to do things by making issues understandable in ways that government officials can understand them. This is simply some of the conferences of some of the participants of the Science Congress. We also undertook a collaborative work on preventing tobacco epidemic in Africa. This was a program, a study led by the National Academy of Sciences of the United States, and a simultaneous program and study was done in many countries, including in this country, and the study was spread and discussed and debated in different fora, and as a result, in some countries, some of the tobacco laws have been also altered. Just to bring to your attention some of the influences and impact science academies can bring. Now, what is our priority area? The Ethiopian Academy of Sciences has as priority the establishment of an AS Science Center. In this country, unlike where you come from, we have no single science center. Our children do not go anywhere to be inspired, to have a passion for science. So the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences wants to have a center where kids' imagination can be rekindled and they can have a passion for science. This is a very important project for us. These are some of the list of publications that we have. I don't go through the list because I may not have much time. This is partly this is a historic building where we are based. This building used to belong to Blattengitari or Selassie. This was the first foreign minister of this nation. He was a very prolific writer. He had written about 30 books on, he was also a scholar in our traditional education. And we wanted to have the house not only for, as custodians of the house, but also to inherit the scholarship tradition of Blattengitari or Selassie, this prolific writer. Some of us grew up reading his books in school, and that is where he used to live. He died during the war, the Ito-Italian War in England, and this country has a great respect for this guy. This is where we are based. We actually renovated it, and it's a big compound, about 13,000 square meters. That is where we want to establish a science center for children. And I wanted to show you here our plan. What you see here is on the peripheries we have rooms that are going to be dedicated for the science center, where children should be inspired to have a passion for science. And the reason why I bring it here is so that you may help us to link with important science centers from wherever you come, so that we can have partnerships. That is, the children need such centers to be inspired. We desire for creating partnerships. We invite scholars to nominate fellows. We look for partnership agreements. We seek support for our projects. We seek for collaborative projects. We invite scholars to participate in our congresses. And this is where I close by showing you our vision for creating a science center to kindle a passion for science in children, in small children. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So I'm ready. Any questions, comments? Yes, Gary.
Thank you very much for this inspiring presentation about the development of your academy here in Ethiopia. In what ways are you linking with other national academies in neighboring countries that are similarly springing up at this point?
Any other? Well, it looks like it went so well that we are only 1%. And after a while we are at it, if you could also indicate if there were any developments within the continent that serve as an inspiration for the establishment of academy.
Yes, as I said earlier, the first thing we had was the Royal Society. But then we soon learned that there was a network of science academies in Africa, and we wrote to them. The network of science academies, which is based in Nairobi, under the auspices of the African Academy of Sciences, these were very helpful also in getting us started. Now the network of African Science Academies has helped establish about from when they were established, I think 6 to 8 new academies have been established through their support. So we have links with the Kenyan Academy of Sciences, Tanzanian Academy of Sciences, and we work also closely with the Sudanese Academy of Sciences, and we want to create a more regional collaborative platform with these various academies. But the African Science Academies, partly because it is now led by a former professor of myself and also many others, Professor Brahanu Abagaz Molla, if you know him. He is now leading the African Science Academy. And we have had projects with the African Science Academy for the last 2-3 years. We undertook a study together with the University of, the Academy of Science and Arts in Ghana, and the Kenyan Academy of Sciences and African Academy of Sciences on equipment. You may know that in this country we have brought in lots of equipment year after year, but most of this equipment are broke, and most of them are not functional. Right when they arrive, they are not functional. There is no disposal system, and the way of importing them, and we have no regulation. And we studied this with these academies and came up with a government policy document with the government. So there is also in line with other academies to collaborate. Now, with African Academy of Sciences, they are planning to establish what's called a Grand Challenges Africa project, and we are partnering with them, and we participate in this big project, and we look forward to further activities. But there are links with many African and regional science academies.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. But especially because you are a young academy, I want to wish you well on behalf of the forum. I think it is very significant that even though you're very young, you have the advantage of having been born in contemporary times, and therefore you have sustainable development as one of your three pillars. I think that's significant. And I think you want to congratulate for keeping that whole vision of developing the Science Center to develop the next generations of children to become scientists. Now with that, I want to introduce Professor Betancourt to give a presentation. We are doing well on time, and that's wonderful.
The Academy and Kofi and the Ethiopian partners for hosting us. It's really my honor to come and be speaking to you today and contribute to this. It's actually, Kofi mentioned that I've been doing research on the continent for 13 years. I've actually been here 15 years, starting with a study in Ethiopia with Kunama refugees on the Eritrea border. So what I'm going to discuss today is an overview of some of our work on the continent, studies of adversity, resilience, child mental health and development, drawing especially from some recent case studies in Sierra Leone and our longitudinal work there for 13 years, and Rwanda, which I just returned from yesterday. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our research program on children and global adversity and some of the conceptual drivers behind it and how that relates to, I think, some of the themes of this meeting. The mixed methods approaches that we use, and moving from observational research to effectiveness studies and now implementation science as much as possible, drawing from these two examples. And then I'll talk with you about some takeaways just from the experiences we've had in research in sub-Saharan Africa. So I mentioned the research program on children and global adversity. Its goals are to identify factors and processes that contribute to risk and resilience in children, families, and communities facing adversity globally. Our focus is on capacities and not just deficits. And we are very interested in contributing to an evidence base on bridging that gap in terms of intervention strategies, the tremendous gap in the resource settings between what we know about children and adversity and toxic stress and the quality and the investments in terms of what's actually done on the ground, and to help support the development of high quality and more effective services, given very limited resources. And we're inspired by people like Julius Richmond, who was really behind the Head Start movement in the United States, former Surgeon General, who talked about the need for the relationship between the knowledge base, political will, and informed public policy. That we really need that strong evidence base to build political will to ensure that effective services are implemented. And we're trying to do that in very low resource settings. So when I talk about adversity, I'm really talking about these two exceptions to recent improvements in child health and development around the world, which are regions affected by armed conflict and violence, and regions affected with a high burden of HIV and AIDS. And as we know, in a place like Rwanda, these two things overlap. We see overlapping time and time again in terms of compounded adversity. that oftentimes we're really looking at situations worsened by multiple vectors come to Sierra Leone now, where I've been working on the post-conflict issues, and now we have the effects of Ebola. And we can talk about that a bit in the discussion. So we've done research across this portfolio in a range of topics, many different parts of Africa. We've worked on the Chechen conflict, northern Uganda, the Ethiopia-Eritrea border, and I'll talk about Sierra Leone and our AIDS portfolio. That's mainly been work in Rwanda, but we've now moved from HIV to also focus on early childhood development, which I'll talk briefly about. And then we actually have a domestic project in Boston working with diaspora African refugee families, Somali Bantu, Somali majority, and also Bhutanese refugees. In all of our work, because we are outsiders, we don't speak the language, we don't know the culture, we have to work with stakeholders and partners. For many years, we really try to stay put. And we use a mixed methods process where we're coming in new to understand, usually from initial formative work and qualitative studies, how people even think about constructs related to parenting, to risk, resilience, to child mental health and development. And then we use that data to inform the development of measures, the adaptation of existing measures, or the creation and validation of new measures. And we also use that to inform our intervention models so that they build on local resources and capacities in how we think about intervention. And then we go back and implement these interventions and test them using the most rigorous designs possible, including at the level of randomized control trials. And this is really a process that we've iterated across multiple settings. So I'm going to talk now about Sierra Leone. As you heard, I've been there 13 years, so numerous collaborators at the university, with the government ministries, with a very large local team who we were able to keep active during the Ebola conflict. In terms of talks I've given throughout the years, I would talk about Sierra Leone and most people hadn't heard of it. But now, since the horrific Ebola outbreak, it's really a place that most people know a little bit about now, here on the border with Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, and Guinea. Just to give you some background on Sierra Leone, even before Ebola, Sierra Leone was affected by an 11-year civil war. I have a loud voice, so I can just talk about the microphone if it works. This conflict, 11 years, involved massive population displacement and the sort of infamous involvement of children into armed forces and armed groups. Upwards of 20,000 were thought to have been involved. Only about 7,000 processed through formal reintegration programs. And another feature of the war were deliberate attempts by rebel groups to sever ties between young people and their communities, to force them to become involved in atrocities so they could feel they'd never be accepted back home if they ran away. And right at the end of the war, when thousands of kids were being released from fighting forces, there was a big policy debate about what was in their best interest. And it was decided, if at all possible, they should return to their families and communities, and this was supported by interim care centers, which were meant to be temporary, set up around the country. This is one that I worked with, run by the International Rescue Committee. And it was around that time, at the time of reintegration, that we launched the longitudinal study. And very much like our program goals, we were interested in identifying risk and protective processes in children's psychosocial adjustment and community reintegration to be informative to programs and to policy. And it's mixed methods research, so we're doing repeat surveys over time, and also deep dive qualitative research, looking at vignettes of certain case studies throughout the years. And these are very vulnerable children, so we also had to anticipate many different relationships to think about referrals and how we could protect the ethics of doing research like this. So this is a summary of our sample. If we could get everyone, it's 529, about a third of them girls. We've had data collection in 2002, 2004, 2008, and now with support from the National Institutes of Child Health and Development, we're in the middle of an intergenerational study of war, going back to find those original young people who were then 10 to 17 when we started the study, who are now parents, and re-enrolling them and their intimate partners as well as their young children in the study to look at issues around intergenerational effects of violence. Just to give you a sense of toxic stress in this sample, this is a paper we published in Child Development of the former child soldiers in our cohort, which are a majority. That average age of abduction was about 10 years on average. Average length of time being socialized by an armed group away from your family was about 4 years in this sample. Violence exposures in terms of frontline fighting being trained very similar in girls and boys, except for sexual violence, which was off the charts for females at 45%, also 5% of males, and that's likely underreported. And these are repeat instances of trauma. More than a quarter of our sample reported being involved in injuring or killing other people, and about half of them were forced to use drugs or alcohol to prepare them for involvement in atrocities. So talk about a situation of horrific toxic stress for child development, for brain development. Now, one thing that's important to note in terms of what we've learned is it's not just about those war exposures in terms of how young people have fared over time. That those who continue to have the poorest outcomes today are really experiencing an accumulation of war-related toxic stress exposures, but also difficulties and additional stressors in the post-conflict environment. So we know from war experiences things like surviving rape are associated with depression, anxiety, participation in injuring or killing others with problems with hostility, deficits in interpersonal skills. But we also see tremendous issues related to stigma. If young people return to stigma, they weren't accepted home, it continues to haunt them in their interpersonal relationships today. Also poor school access, having life opportunities and no social support are tremendously important predictors of young people not faring well. And it's really this constellation of symptoms and impairments that impede role functioning, being able to perform well when given a school opportunity, being able to hold down a job when given a youth employment opportunity. And there's a lot that we found. We see tremendous resilience in our sample. And some of our trajectory analyses, if we look at, this is elevated symptom levels, but if we look at who's really getting worse over time or on a very high trajectory, it's about 11%. And on average, 80% are staying around where they had always been or improving. So there's not only a situation of terrible outcomes, but tremendous resilience. And the things related to that are relationships in the community, having adequate social support, having life opportunities. But how do we help those kids who can't function when given those opportunities? So drawing from our longitudinal research, we felt that we were really obligated to move into intervention work in Sierra Leone. This is a paper we just published in 2014 in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry on a randomized controlled trial of behavioral intervention that is drawn from the longitudinal study. Before we designed the intervention, we went out and talked again to people working with youth, to key stakeholders in the government, to youth themselves, to elders, caregivers. And of course, as you might imagine, in Sierra Leone, one of the immediate issues that comes to the forefront is limited human resources. This is a war-affected and now Ebola-affected country of 6 million people. There is one quasi-retired psychiatrist for the whole country, a handful of master's level people, and a few doctoral level people. We cannot look to highly trained professionals to deliver these services. We have to think about working with people at a very basic level of training, working with lay workers with excellent training and supervision structures, and that's really the name of the game. And thinking about working along the collectivist culture, working with young people in groups. Also, we have issues of comorbidity and histories of complex trauma. You don't see young people presenting with just clean depression or a clean traumatic stress reaction sort of profile, that oftentimes these things are co-occurring. So we have to think about cross-cutting intervention components that are evidence-based for a range of different problems. And doing mental health programming alone is not sufficient. We have to think about those links to life opportunities, to education, and to employment. And so that was the genesis of the Youth Readiness Intervention, which is a components-based intervention informed by the longitudinal study and our additional work in the field. It's a group model designed to be administered by a wide range of providers. It draws from trauma-informed interventions, really pulling together 6 evidence-based components that you see a lot in cognitive behavioral therapy or interpersonal therapy for kids who have problems in self-regulation. Issues of psychoeducation about trauma and its effects on you and your interpersonal relationships and your self-perceptions, self-regulation skills and relaxation skills, cognitive restructuring to address some of those negative self-perceptions, behavioral activation, communication and interpersonal skills, and then sequential problem solving, being able to set life goals and work towards them in small steps. We're not trying to do in-depth trauma processing in groups because we want this to go to scale and be done by partners locally in a way that's ethical and safe. And there's a lot of trauma-focused care going on, but very little around really helping youth build the skills that can help them perform better in life opportunities. So the trial involved 436 youth in 2012. We recruited, using the UN definition of youth, 15 to 24-year-olds. The groups were stratified by age group and by gender. And young people had to have an elevated level of distress and impairment. We knew about that from our longitudinal study. We knew sort of what the cut points could be. And what we found, which was very exciting, was after getting this readiness intervention, we saw post-intervention effects that were significant for improving emotion regulation, improving interpersonal skills, social support, but also functional impairment. And impairment is why we care so much about mental health in the global sphere, because if you can't care for your kids, if you can't get out of bed, you can't work, you can't perform in school, now we've really got to consider the burden of problems like mental health conditions. And what's exciting about this trial is after young people were randomly assigned to the intervention or not, they got a subsidized school opportunity. And what we found is that functioning finding extended to the school environment. The young people who got the readiness intervention showed better school attendance and persistence. And also the teachers didn't know who was in which group, but they were rated by teachers independently as having better classroom behavior. So these are effect sizes. I know we have a lot of scientists in the room, but I'm not going to dwell on these. We're getting a small to moderate effect in the 0.3 range, but not bad for an intervention delivered by lay people in negotiated free spaces in the community in the slums of Freetown. Now I want to talk about intergenerational issues. This is a commentary I just published in JAMA Psychiatry about the intergenerational effect of war. And this spills over to so many different forms of adversity. And now I want to take you to Rwanda and how we've moved from the HIV work now to looking at early childhood development. So this was originally work sponsored by the National Institute of Mental Health through an R34 grant. We were working with Partners in Health, so they're out in the eastern area of Rwanda on the border with Tanzania and Burundi. Some of you may know Rwanda. It's a teeny country with an intense population density, 11.5 inhabitants, a great number of them under the age of 18. Now Rwanda, like Ethiopia, is showing tremendous strides forward on health. We've seen HIV prevalence and incidence dropping precipitously under tremendous leadership there. But this is also a situation of compounded adversity. You have the situation of the '94 genocide and its after effects, and the impact on the social fabric, and then the AIDS epidemic layered together. And many stakeholders were cognizant of the importance of behavioral issues, mental health, and very interested in prevention. And this comes to the contact with the health system of individuals who are HIV positive. Well, they're coming into care, but not their extended families. Kids who are HIV positive, individuals, parents who are HIV positive are getting support, but what about the other kids in the family? And so we did a case control study actually looking at mental health and protective resources in kids who were HIV positive compared to kids who were affected because a caregiver was living with HIV compared to unaffected kids. We found very similar rates of depression, conduct problems, and other mental health problems in the HIV positive and the affected kids compared to the unaffected. So you see extreme vulnerability even in those households. And the question was, how can we build on resources at the individual, family, community level to do better by families facing adversity in this manner? So we come back to our mixed methods roots. We had original qualitative studies, adaptation and validation of measures, adaptation of an intervention I'll tell you a bit about, and then a randomized trial. Now, I won't go into the Kinyarwanda, but we've written a lot on protective processes and how they're defined locally, what their indicators are, how we can use that in measurement, as well as the indicators of mental health problems in kids. Now, when it came to thinking about intervention, we went back to the evidence base. And our original intervention is based on the family-based preventative intervention developed by Bill Beardsley at Children's Hospital. It's in the National Registry of Effective Programs and Practices. And we were drawn to it. It was originally developed for the prevention of depression in the offspring of depressed caregivers. We know it's a tremendously important risk factor. But it was developed for a wide range of providers. It's family-based. It focuses on enhancing resilience and communication in families managing stressors due to parental chronic illness. And we saw this as a good fit to HIV and also to the human resources struggles and culturally the focus on resilience. So from our formative work, we knew a lot of the issues families were facing, misinformation and fear about HIV and AIDS, fear of touching their parents, of sharing eating utensils with them, the sense that HIV in the family is a crisis. Why bother living? Why bother staying with school? Our life is over now that mom or dad have HIV. Poor communication and conflict amongst family members, risk for violence and harsh punishment of children, and family social and economic stress. And so core components of the intervention include psychoeducation about HIV and AIDS, but also about trauma, those families where it's relevant. Helping the family establish a narrative, and this is really where resilience comes in, the story of the family. Remember, all these families are oftentimes genocide survivors. So they've been through many different things in the past. We can draw on those strengths and supports in our intervention. And then improving parenting skills and parent-child relationships and communication skills, outlining, and then lastly, there's a bridging function. The family home visitor can help the family navigate issues like getting support to attend school if you're out of school, accessing the mutual health insurance program, helping them navigate also informal resources and supports in their community. Who can you talk to and get advice about this? Who are the important people in your life? How might you approach them? So it's brief, strengths-based, 6 to 11 sessions depending on the families. There's a manualized protocol and a set of fidelity monitoring tools. It brings in a great deal of cultural content. And this moves towards a family meeting, which is really about getting the parent back in the driver's seat. There are key themes drawn from Rwandan culture that for people who aren't very literate, this helps them connect. These are proverbs, sayings they've heard their whole life, such as nothing can defeat combined hands. And people can refer to those things in thinking about what is the goal of the session by session that we're working on. We published an open trial and just finished a randomized trial, and these are preliminary data. I'd love your thoughts on them. We were basically comparing 82 families, half randomized to the family strengthening home visiting intervention and half to usual social work services. This comprised 170 children and 123 caregivers, half of them single caregiver households. This is sort of the flow through the study. Kids in this trial are on average about 12 years of age, house sizes about 5 on average. Very high satisfaction in those qualitative reports, and people being willing to do it again and recommend the study or recommend the intervention to others. Now, in terms of mental health, we very excitingly saw an impact, a significant effect for depression in children, and found that being in the family strengthening intervention was associated with reduced depression at 3-month follow-up. Now, there's something very interesting that goes on in this study with HIV and the dynamics around HIV that we don't see the effects until 3 months out for depression. We do see increases in children's pro-social behavior, both at post-assessment and follow-up. But it's not, it's underpowered to fully find a, lower than p-value 0.05 on that. Now, an interesting thing is children getting the intervention actually at the post-test, but not at 3-month follow-up, reported less good parenting than those in the usual services. And when we looked at the data, qualitative and quant, it looks like the family strengthening intervention may have helped families have some of their first discussions about HIV and help them disclose, which they hadn't been disclosing. And that may have stirred some things up, but it washes out after 3 months. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on this from the AIDS people in the room. In terms of caregiver outcomes, we did see significant improvements in social support for the single caregivers, and for dual caregiver households at 3-month follow-up, less alcohol use, as well as reductions in intimate partner violence. So there's some exciting things going on, which have now led to a request from the World Bank to make an early childhood development version of the intervention. So we drew from the UNICEF Care for Child Development modules, as well as nutrition and hygiene materials being used by the government and USAID, as well as working with Jack Schoenkoff and the Center on the Developing Child on coaching models, where you're really working at the household level to encourage responsive parenting. Now, the family strengthening intervention for ECD is 15 modules, covering those core topics that you see commonly across ECD interventions, but we're also keeping the focus on violence reduction, on resilience, and the strong cultural content throughout the manual. So we're wrapping up a pilot now. I just returned from from Rwanda, goodness, I'm on airplanes all the time, to check in on our team. And what's exciting that's coming together now in Rwanda is a tremendous opportunity that's very policy relevant. Because now there's the chance to integrate this intervention into the social protection system. Rwanda has a flagship social protection system to eradicate extreme poverty. And we can work with them to designate the families who are receiving ranking as being the most extreme poor. Right now, for those moms who have young children, they're out digging ditches. They're doing hard physical labor. There's no cash transfer. There's cash for work. But now there's a decision to try more family-friendly employment models, looking at flexible work, closer to home, less physically laborious. And what we want to be comparing is standard cash for work for parents of young children, child-sensitive reformed public works, and now this FSI ECD home visiting model, and then the combination to look at complementarities. This would be the trial. We're pulling many partners together for now, which would be across 52 cells and 1,040 families in Rwanda, looking at these 4 arms. So I know that I'm out of time, but I hope that the value of this discussion is to remember the importance of moving this evidence base forward. It's time now in our field to move from observational studies to intervention development and evaluation with all attention to ethics that we can bring to that, and eventually move to implementation science. That's really where we need to be going, looking at how we can get these programs to work at scale. And I think an exciting thing we've been very sort of captivated with is thinking about alternate delivery platforms for evidence-based interventions, such as taking behavioral interventions for youth to school settings, to the educational platform, to the youth employment platform that's being invested in by the government and the World Bank. We will never have a robust mental health system in Sierra Leone, probably in my lifetime, but we can reach young people through youth employment and through education. And taking ECD programs through the social protection system. If we want to move families out of poverty, this has to be a part of the package. It's not just about cash. And thinking about cost effectiveness, and also building local capacity to put people like me out of work. So this is really being led by local governments and local actors and stakeholders. And that's going to take collaboration to arrive at a point of sustainability. So with that, I'll wrap up with this quote from an HIV positive father in our trial who said, "I learned about having hope because we sometimes thought, after all, what is the point of living? Conversations with the intervention team helped us a lot to have hope. I'm grateful that we have people like you who give us morale to live again, and it's that hope we all hope to work towards and over." Thank you.
We do have some time for questions and the conversation. And I will start to look out for your hands. I see one here, Quentin. Another here. 3, 4. Okay, so let's go with those 4.
Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned in Sierra Leone that you measured sexual violence during the involvement of the youth. Do you also measure sexual abuse before the involvement in the conflict? And if so, was there a relationship between, let's say, child abuse very early in life and then what happened during the conflict? And were there additional, like some of the symptoms that you mentioned, depression and anxiety, was that the same level? Was it more profound? Did they have post-traumatic stress disorder? I know that also the conflict will lead to that. So I just want to understand better if you were able to measure that and then the relationships.
So 2 quick questions. One very practical. Is this one of the evaluations funded by the Strategic Impact Evaluation Fund? Then I can find out who it is at the back. More importantly, what's your thought about external validity, especially with the type of interventions that you mentioned for Sierra Leone, where you have a very committed team, and you mentioned scale up, but even the Rwanda is not scale up. It's 1,000 families. So what kind of process would help for achieving external validity?
Thanks, Therese, for very, very exciting results that say, I think, as much about the methods and process of doing this kind of research as exciting as the results themselves are. A couple questions. One is around, in the ECD field, we have so few examples of doing a great job involving men in intervention, so I'd love to hear, maybe from the qualitative perspective and the initial qualitative work, how the aspects of the culturally based adaptation of, say, Bill's intervention or the cognitive, well, I guess maybe within the family strengthening intervention, how that worked, possibly, the themes that you found were different, perhaps for fathers and mothers, and how you incorporated that into the intervention. And then a question on the scale issue, which is, I think the notion of task shifting, which has been quite prevalent in the kind of health literature and around community health workers, for example. I think it was quite exciting to hear that you're thinking of the the social protection system and its potential. And so this idea of how, what you foresee is, I guess, both the challenges and opportunities of this idea. I'm not sure I like the phrase task shifting, but it has been compelling for certain kinds of health, huge impacts in certain areas of health. And we don't see it very much in written about around implementation and scale in other sectors, perhaps like social protection and education and ECD. So any of your further thoughts on that would be great.
Well, as always, thank you for your wonderful work and your persistence in a very challenging research environment. As you know, you have to leave before the Wednesday discussion about disruption. And I just wanted to ask you if there's any other observations you want to share from your firsthand experience of the ways in which Ebola disrupted what was happening in Sierra Leone, particularly in early child development. Although your research is just moving in there with the next generation, I still think you probably have been thinking a great deal about this. So if there's anything else you think we should talk about or know about for Wednesday?
Yeah, that's great.
Good. Okay, that's probably enough questions, and we'll give you the opportunity to address them.
Yeah, excellent questions, really. So just briefly on the sexual abuse, that's such an important question. And remember that a lot of these kids in Sierra Leone were abducted, so they're having like normative developmental trajectories. It's not a situation of necessarily maltreatment or abuse or neglect, and then it worsens. It's really kids living average lives and then they're taken. We don't have a lot on their, a lot of them were taken at age 10. We don't have a lot retrospectively on prior to that abduction. We do have after you got back to the family who cared for you after the war, and of course, when those things still occur, it's so much worse, especially, and for the girls and the boys. And actually some of the research that we've done shows additional vulnerability for boys because it's so stigmatized. So it's a really important issue. In terms of external validity, and yes, this is Evaluation Challenge Fund that is supporting us and bringing this project together in Rwanda, as well as World Bank, USAID. It's going to take a lot of different partners to do this. And it's very exciting because of the government collaboration. One thing I've learned from working with John Wise at Harvard, who's very well known for his work around behavioral interventions for children and adolescents, is the phrase being deployment focused. Don't make your study one that's sort of perfect for the lab, but isn't going to work in the real world. You've got to constantly be paying attention to the real world when you do this research, and you might get effects that are a little less glamorous, but you're getting something that's realistic. And so that's why we're actually getting back to your question, tax shifting, and looking at can this be done with community workers under the child protection ministry, not people I hire just for the study. And can our identification and delivery platform be the vision Umurenge, the social protection poverty reduction strategy? So that deployment focus is tremendously important in how we're thinking about the study. In terms of the ECD and men, which I think is such a wonderful question again, we definitely went with home visiting because we saw that men were out of the picture in so many other of the ECD initiatives that were being conceptualized in Rwanda. We knew from our prior work that violence and household and substance abuse were tremendously important issues. And by working with the family schedule, visiting at times that work for them, and really bringing that father in, emphasizing his role, how important he is to his brain development, that by being a part of this stimulating and safe environment for kids, his kids can thrive and be more successful and take care of him better in the future. And bringing that back to Rwandan cultural content and proverbs and sayings. And we found that in our qualitative data, there were really wonderful sort of reports from women saying, my husband was never engaged. He said that's woman's work. But since doing the intervention, he now sees that you can't do this alone and it takes combined hands. So definitely, I think that mechanism of the fathers is being activated by doing this kind of strengths-focused home visiting, and it's critical. And I love your question on task shifting. I think this is really the critical issue. And in terms of external generalizability, again, Rwanda has made tremendous progress, and I'd love to learn more about Ethiopia actually, in its system of community health workers. And that's been a part of the health success in Rwanda, is that they were able at the level of communities to find out mechanisms for incentivizing, for training and supervising what are more or less community volunteers. But the problem is, and I saw this in Sierra Leone, that we shift the burden to volunteers and then we don't pay them a decent wage. We don't professionalize something that's extremely sensitive, what they're doing, home visiting the household. So we have to learn in Rwanda from the community health worker experience, because now they've arrived at having these small collectives so that there is some sort of incentive and remuneration for the work of the community health workers. Now that takes a delicate discussion with governments to think about what are going to be the incentive structures, what are going to be the supervision structures. And there's this new cadre of workers called the Inshuti Z'Umuryango, which in Rwanda means Friends of the Family, and they were launched after deinstitutionalization in Rwanda. So they're like community health workers, but they're under the Social Protection Ministry. And so what we're trying to do is work with them as they're being rolled out to see if they can be engaged in community work around ECD home visiting. Now, we're going to learn a lot from doing this. So part of the research is also process evaluation of barriers and facilitators to even doing that, because I think that's going to be a big part of the learning. And then I really wish I was going to be here when you have the discussion on shocks and acute shocks and Ebola, because my whole life for the last year has been about Ebola in Sierra Leone, and seeing, first be very concerned about all the people that we care about in the country, and actually did contribute. Our staff are so good at quantitative and qualitative research that we were able to get some support to conduct research on the social context of Ebola and look at questions around community trust and stigma for survivors, and also people's risky and sort of salutogenic behaviors and mental health. So that's data that we're working with now, and we're actually making that a longitudinal study. So we've done one wave, we're going back for a second wave. But in terms of what I'd like you all to discuss is please take up this theme of building back better for kids. I am so concerned in Sierra Leone. We were tenuously developing an ECD discussion. It wasn't even an agenda. We were starting to talk to the ministries. Ministry of Education had finally assigned an ECD person. We were discussing with UNICEF, and once Ebola hit, there was nothing to be done. Schools have been closed for a year. Teen pregnancy has skyrocketed. All these kids have been out of school. There are already huge issues with sexual exploitation. Now schools have just reopened in March. ECD is off the agenda. Just to get back around that discussion has been so challenging. And how do we keep doing this? How do we keep having humanitarian and health crises and we just lose the thread? And then we're back 10 years from where we started, instead of anticipating that this is going to challenge our course that we were setting. How do we keep that course? And how do we keep the thread? And how do we build back better? And if you all could take that up when you have your discussion about Ebola, I'd be most grateful.
Thank you very much. Now, would you all join me in thanking our speakers for such a wonderful